Isabel, welcome back to my channel. So today I want to talk about my growth journey. 3 primary ways that I've grown I've attempted to grow my personality, and kind of what are the pros and cons of each of these methods and what I've thought about them. So before I get into kind of the 3 growth methods that I've attempted, I just want to talk about the 8 cognitive functions real quick, because I've predominantly only talked about the top 4. So I've just kind of picked an INTJ because I've got a lot of INTJs on this channel. So your top 4 functions are as listed here, but there's actually 8 cognitive functions, and the way you determine what the bottom 4 are is it's the same function. So like if your first one's an N function, your fifth one's also an N function, but you just flip the attitude. So if your first one's NI, your fifth one's NE. If your second one's TE, your sixth one's TI. The top 4 are the 4 functions that you consciously value. So you're aware of them and you value them. The bottom 4 functions you tend to not value, and you're also not conscious of when you use them. To add another layer to this, because I want to get very, TE kind of growth oriented, where's the growth points? The green ones are kind of potential strengths. Now, it's not that they necessarily are a strength, because for example, people tend to neglect their second function. So your second function might not be a strength for you, but it's a potential strength. Your third function is a probable weakness. So like your third function, it's very probable that it's a weakness. It's kind of, I talked about in the loop video, it's the bratty teenager. It thinks it's so great, but it's just, in all likelihood, it's a weakness. I put probable weakness because especially in older people who are more balanced and more seasoned, they can actually be really good. But if you're in your 20s, I can almost just blanket statement it. I almost would just say it is a weakness, and there's a high likelihood that it is a weakness. So this is just kind of the background of the 8 functions, because now when I talk about the ways I've tried to grow myself, I will touch on the 8 functions a little bit. So at this time, before I knew about cognitive functions, I was incredibly depressed. My days would consist of, I would skip class, or maybe I would go to one class. I was a math major, and I would just kind of skip class because I didn't feel like it. That's kind of a bad FI type thing, like I don't feel like it. I would watch movie commentaries. So I would go on this is on the DVD player. I'd go on the DVD player and I'm watching the commentaries, or like all the background information of how they made the movie. And then I would drive half an hour to the next city over, and I would go to Barnes & Noble and I would read like a philosophy book. I would just sit down, read the book in one sitting, and then I would go home. I'd be there for hours. And ethics books, philosophy books, personality books, Enneagram, generations books, a lot of different, systems type books. A lot having to do with ethics. And I was incredibly depressed, and depression is not synonymous with FI, but in my case, it was very FI related. And so when I came into personality, I was very NI-FI. That's why I got these stars here. That was my default. When I came into knowing about it, I was incredibly NI-FI. So anyways, then I eventually was researching and I came upon Personality Hacker. So I learned about the top 4 functions. And Personality Hacker's advice is to develop your co-pilot. So this is the first growth method that I want to talk about. I think I even took a course from Personality Hacker, and they said to read The Effective Executive. They said to read Getting Things Done. And I implemented so many systems from those books. I've got like an email clear-out system and a task management system and a project management system. And I started setting 5-year goals and chunking back from those goals. A lot of my set systems not goals videos. I have a lot of goal setting videos. If you don't know about my non-personality videos, a ton of goal oriented videos. And those really came from the knowledge that I gained during this time. This is probably, when I was working on TE, was probably 2017, 2018, 2019. Let's say probably 3 years of just isolating this function and fully working on it. What I found about it, not talking about the pros and cons of this, is I find that because your second function is in a different attitude than your first function, so if your first function is introverted, your second one's extroverted, there's a certain level of exhaustion that kind of happens. So it's like, I'd have motivation to work on TE for a few months and then kind of dip off. And then eventually I'd get back around to it, and the next peak would be a little higher. And I get a little tired, but then the next peak would be a little higher, and the highs just kept getting higher and higher and higher and higher, and I felt like the lows weren't as low each time. And so I felt like, what I feel like with your second function is it's like a muscle that you have to work, and it's very similar to working out in that, it's hard on the short term, maybe it feels exhausting on the short term, but it's very energizing in the long term. But it just feels like coming home to yourself. So over time, I had heard that your 4th function is the gateway to the unconscious. And I was like, I don't know what that means, but I was like, I'll just experiment with it. I guess I'll see. So this was probably end of 2019. And, coincidentally, I was actually going to a counselor at the time, and she obviously, she doesn't know about cognitive functions at all, but she was like, I think you need to get into your body more. And so she was really encouraging me, kind of in her own way, for me to get into SE. So I started trying to get into it, and my husband's an ISFP, so he's got SE, so I was kind of leaning on him, and he at the same time started working on his TE, because that's his fourth function. So we were kind of like synergistically kind of working off each other. So I'd give him advice, he'd give me advice, and we're trying to work on these things. So I tried to get into all sorts of sensory pleasure type things, sensory indulgences. So I got really into clothes at this time, really into makeup, really into perfume. I tried to get into sports. So I got really into tennis, volleyball, spike ball. So I was trying to get myself in my body a lot more. I got a lot healthier at this time. I think I had gained a lot of weight when this was maybe like 2017, because when you're just so much in NI-FI, I was just sitting all the time, sitting reading, sitting researching, and that was really not good for my body. So getting into SE was really good in that regard. It got me healthy. So this was right around when I started my YouTube channel. So I think end of 2019 is when I posted a fashion video. It was my first fashion video. So it was really good to help, let's make the background better. Let's get camera quality, the microphone quality. So it became really helpful, and I found that my message is received a lot more the better the videos look. Now that's something that I don't like that's a fact, but that it just is a fact. The better things look, the more people are gonna use it. So my pros and cons of working on your fourth function. Okay, pros, your first function is such a heavy hitter, and your fourth function's the opposite of that. So it tends to really be neglected, completely absent. It's like the baby of the family, or like Personality Hacker calls it the 3-year-old. So it's, you don't go to it to make the big family decisions or whatever. So I'm not trying to make it, head of the household or anything like that. I'm not trying to be a pro athlete or anything. However, you don't want the baby starving and crying or whatever. It's still important. And so you want to get this function to where it's not a dead weight, to where I'm not obese and this is causing a lot of problems. So you want it to get up to speed where it's not causing you any problems. It's not going to be a huge strength, but you don't want to cause any problems. So I think it was definitely really useful. I think the cons of it are that it doesn't really feel like yourself. It does feel like you're going away from yourself a little bit, because NI kind of feels like me, and SE, it feels like you're going away from yourself, and that definitely has its issues. So you can't do it too long. What I've found is that I actually like to do things that blend my first and fourth function together. I have not had good results blending my second and third function. That does not work because they already have a tendency to not be differentiated. I just had a video about differentiation. Your first and fourth function, your first function is already so differentiated that you don't have a tendency to do this bad melding of the two functions. So what I've found, I'll go on a bike ride, so I'm still working my body, but I have a podcast in or something. So it's mostly NI, and my body's kind of on autopilot. I'm really mostly in NI, but I'm not sedentary. So I worked on SE probably from end of 2019 to somewhere in 2021, I would say. So then finally, I would say maybe beginning of 2022, I started working on TI slightly. Now this happened kind of naturally. I would say I had gotten a lot of feedback that I was not precise enough on my YouTube channel. I have a tendency to be prescriptive before I'm descriptive, or to never be descriptive at all. This is a very TI distinction, prescriptive versus descriptive. So you'll see a lot of TI users want to precisely describe things, get down to the nuance and the complexity of describing something. TE is why do you want to spend all your time describing things? What's the point of it? Why do you care if you can perfectly describe something? How can you use it? Are you going to try to use this to better yourself? Are you going to try to use this to make money? What are you using this for? So I think that I would always just prescribe things. So a lot of especially you look at my earlier videos, some of my very first videos were just this is what a loop is. How do you get out of one? How to manage your money? How to manage your time? How to get out of a loop? And it's a lot of how-to videos without a lot of depth. It's not getting into the depth or describing of things. It skips a lot of in-depth description for the sake of here's the prescription, how to do this, and it just kind of assumes well, what I might describe in the video is, well, I tried this, and this, and this is the best for this and this reasons. But a lot of times in these videos, it'll skip over the reasoning process. It's just this is the best, just trust me guys, this is the best. So anyways, I've tried to become a lot more precise because I got a lot of feedback that my videos were not precise, my language was not precise. So I started using a lot more clauses it depends, and sometimes but not all the time, or there's a tendency toward but it doesn't necessitate. and trying to use a lot more precise language. Part of me working on TI a little bit in a TE way is including these visuals, having these Canva presentations that I've been presenting. Because when I make these presentations, especially if I can quote Carl Jung, there's a lot more precise word choice, which I can read that and then it anchors me to remember this is the precise word I want to use. Because a lot of times I just will have a vibe of what I'm going for and I just kind of pick the first word that comes to mind, but it could convey the wrong thing. And so I tried to be a lot more precise naturally. And then I listened to a personality hacker video saying that you should work on your 6th function. And so then that kind of solidified that. Okay, let me start working on TI. Now, here's the pros and cons with it. Each of these has pros and cons. The 6th function, working on it, I found has a little bit more cons that I found with other ones. The first con is that it's introverted, and I already have a tendency to be so introverted. And so I find that I get like in this zone, you know, like when you get in flow or you get in zone, I find that if I'm so NI with TI, I'm just gone all day. Like Garrett will get home and I am just like absorbed in whatever I was learning. It's like this vacuum that just sucks me in. So that's an issue, just getting too introverted. The other issue is that you can't use TE and TI at the same time. Now, TE is part of who I feel like I am, and so TI is not who I feel like I am, and you can't use them both at the same time. So I feel like I'm losing some TE. What TE is really good at is orienting toward beginners and saying this is what is usable for people. The extroverted functions, TE and FE in particular, are very in touch with what people need, what beginners need. You explain the basics, you explain it in a very sequential, organized fashion so that people can understand it and absorb it and then use it and apply it. TI is not as in touch in that type of way. So I found that what I started doing is, in trying to cater to all these comments that had nitpicked my precision, I started catering toward other experts. Not that I'm necessarily an expert, but just other people who have I started catering to people who have a deep knowledge of personality. And I have to think about what is my end goal. Do I want to make very precise content for other experts who potentially already know a lot of this stuff? Or do I want to make content for beginners? So I had to start thinking about how can I maintain the level of precision while maintaining the level of usability, because those things are at odds with each other a lot of the time. I think if you combine TE and TI well, you can get a simple elegance, like an elegantly simple. What I want to do is, I think, go back and work on TE a little bit. I think there's kind of this law of diminishing returns, and the return on investment gets smaller and smaller with each of these functions that I've worked on. So I worked on TE, and like for 3 years, I felt like I was getting so much out of that. Then I went to SE, and maybe for 2 years or so, I was getting so much out of it. And then I'm in TI, maybe a year, I'm getting some out of it. But working on SE and working on TI have both in ways pulled me out of TE, which I haven't liked. So what I would say is, if I'm gonna TE this, here's the advice, here's the prescriptive part, what's the bottom line here? If you haven't already spent 3 years minimum working on your 2nd function, I would do that. And there will be peaks and valleys, but each peak will be higher and each valley will be a little higher, and you get better and better and better. Each peak will be a little less exhausting. Each peak is more rewarding. Each time, there's you have that short-term hit for the long-term reward, and each time that hit is a little bit less severe, and it's a little bit better. And I've found so much benefit from working that 2nd function. Garrett's found so much benefit from working that 2nd function. I have the video about loops and differentiation that I think is so important. So the key is pick a function, work on it for an extended amount of time. At some point, it feels like you're hitting a wall, so maybe you add in a little spice to your 4th function, you do that for a while, and then maybe you go back to your 2nd function. Like what I might do is go 2, 4, 2, 6, 2, and then maybe I'll go to something else, but there's always this tendency to neglect that 2nd function, so it always takes this responsibility to get back into it, because your 2nd function is how you parent yourself, it's how you parent your 3rd function, it's how you parent others, it's how you provide impact to the world, it's how you teach people, it's really how you find fulfillment. Like at your funeral, people are probably going to be talking about how their 2nd function impacted you. Your 1st function's for yourself, and how you express yourself, but your 2nd function is for others. And so if you want to have, a balanced, more fulfilled life, your 2nd function is really where it's at. So yeah, that's how I've grown. I'm interested to see what you guys think. I'm always interested to try a new method of growth. So yeah, let me know what you've done. Thanks so much for watching. Bye.